Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much indeed for being here for this session with Patrick Holland and Cassian Harrison. Just to give you an idea of how this session is going to run, we've got 75 minutes. We've got a lot to pack into those 75 minutes. We're going to start with Patrick. Then Cassian is going to join us for a little bit of a crossover. And Patrick will depart and we'll continue with Cassian. Patrick, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for...
So popular.
Right. I think it's Cassian. I think they will come for Cassian.
Sorry if you are sat on the stairs. Should have got here earlier. Anyway, let's, before we start, remind ourselves of BBC2. We are going to have some time for questions at the end of each individual session. So if you want to submit questions, that's done through the app. So we've had a few in already. So if you have anything specific that you want to ask either Patrick or Cassian, then get your questions in now via the app. How would you describe BBC2, Patrick? What does it mean to you?
Well, I think if you see from that tape that the sheer variety, the sheer vibrancy, the sheer just range of challenging, complex, mischievous content. BBC2 for me is a place to be unorthodox. It's a place that sits outside. It's a mainstream channel that was made to do things differently. I spoke earlier in the year about BBC2's original mission as a challenger brand it was made to be unorthodox, and I think that what we've been doing, the work we've been doing over the last 2 years, has been to re-engage BBC2 with that mission and to find, the BBC2 of today, I think, is an essential part of the television landscape. Channels have never been more important. And so bringing that range of qualities, which you can see in all of that different content, to the audience, I think is what BBC2 is about.
What have been some of the highlights for you over the past 12 months?
I think that in Factual, that some of the history pieces have felt really, really like they've reinvigorated history on the channel. I think that House Through Time, David Olusoga in that series was able to tell stories about Britain, but parts of social history from parts of Britain that we might not necessarily hear about. So those stories of life through generations in Liverpool and the way in which that house tells you that vibe, that story of working class life, of middle class life, mercantile life, of empire, of the retreat of empire, all through one house. I thought it was an exceptional piece of television. Audiences loved it. I thought that the Blitz, the Bombs That Changed Britain, another piece of exceptional storytelling, taking you into these lives. The voices that you just don't hear from, but told with a level of ambition and with a creative desire to tell the very, very best of the stories in the very, very best ways possible. That gave them real scale. So the story of the bombs that landed on Hull, that then were used to justify the firebombing of German cities later in the war, I thought was an exceptional piece. So I think that history has been an amazing, seen an amazing revitalisation on the channel, and I think science as well. I think that Surgeons was such a brave, if you want to see how the qualities of how science changed on the channel, then you see in Surgeons a complete desire to engage with the complexity of what is going on in those operations. There was absolutely no sort of hand-holding voiceover that was saying, come on, we're going to sort of like tell you this in baby steps. What we're going to do is we're going to tell you exactly the medical science that's going on here and the decision-making that's going on within the minds of these surgeons. And it made for extraordinarily gripping viewing and brought a huge younger audience to the channel as well. So I thought that was wonderful.
With the success of something like Hospital, where you is it a case where you see the success of that and the production company who made that label won, is that then you're looking to not replicate that but find something of a similar ilk that can pull in an audience and going specifically to that production company to try and fulfill that brief?
So with Hospital, it was one of the first things that I commissioned when I took over at the channel, and it was, I've spoken about it before, I think it's such an extraordinary series and it's such an important series for the channel because what it does is engage with stories that are relevant to the audience today that are happening now. And but when you bring the BBC2 craft, you bring the BBC2 level of creative vision and care to that level to the storytelling. So it's not a news report, but what you're doing is you're telling stories that are happening in Britain this winter on the telly 6 weeks later. So for me, it's sort of, I keep using it as a touchstone. Most probably people are a bit bored of me using it as a touchstone now, but it's because it encapsulates that vitality. But with lots of production companies then came to us and said, well, what about that for hospital, for police, or what about it for other parts of the public sector? And in fact, there is something about that time, it's happening now, it's going to be on telly a month later, 6 weeks later, that with the NHS, that is absolutely right for that story. But with other public services, it felt that there were very different ways of telling those stories, although you still want to be able to get to those layers of complexity. So there's a clip that I would like to show you now, and it does actually come from Label 1, and but it's not made in the same way. It's about schools. But it's not made in the same way as hospital is, because lives don't change in days in the way that they do, or minutes as they do in hospitals and schools. They change over a year. So filmed over a year, one group of a group of schools in an academy trust in Gloucester, South Gloucester. And the ambition with it was to try and see how the changes that are happening in the education system and the funding issues that are happening in the education system impact on teachers, impact on families, impact on kids. And so I think that what the series has got is, the clip that we'll show you now has got, you meet the head teacher who is, I think it's in the second term of the whole year, so they film over a year. This will be a clip from later on in the series. You find out that this school has gone into special measures at the beginning of the series because it's in a rural setting. It's got a very, very mixed intake, some middle class, lower income families. And so it's a good traditional sort of comp from in an ordinary bit of Britain. There's nothing spectacular about what was going on there. And then they got a bad Ofsted, and they got a bad Ofsted because they had truanting kids, and that they were finding it hard to retain kids. And so suddenly after that Ofsted, what happens is the role collapses. People don't want to send their kids to the school anymore. The income that follows the kids collapses, and Ofsted then come again, and we meet them in this clip at the point where he's just suddenly trying to tell his senior team that at the GCSE year, they're going to have class sizes of over 40 as the kids approach GCSE.
Let's have a look. How many episodes?
6.
Wow.
So, and it's that ambition, the access that you get to the teachers, that you see the stress on teachers in a way, and teachers are a much sort of maligned occupation, but they the public perception of teachers, I think, is not. This series gives you an insight into their lives and the pressure that they're under in a way that I think that as parents you just don't see.
Let's talk a little bit about when things aren't quite going the right way and they don't get the reaction you maybe were hoping for, or obviously hoping for. Civilizations, which an attempt to kind of follow up Kenneth Clarke's legendary 69 series. What was your feeling about the reaction that had?
I thought that the films in Civilizations were remarkable. I thought that if you see Mary Beard on the role of the image in religious faith, if you see David Olusoga on his extraordinary film that he made about the role of art in the sort of cultural exchange between major parts of the world, and if you saw Simon's film about the different renaissances that were happening in East and West at the same time, I think that it was making remarkable connections between cultures in just a very, very different remit to a very, very different editorial spec from Kenneth Clarke's original. So I think that there are films within that series that are absolutely remarkable, and I think that to have to have that series sitting in the heart of BBC2 with the audience all talking about culture, civilizations, the role of art in civilizations is exactly what the BBC should be doing. So I think that was a remarkable achievement.
You had a kind of big hole to fill with Bake Off, which you did with the Big Family Cooking Showdown, which is coming back.
Well, Bake Off left BBC2 a long time ago.
But to try and fill that void that was left with it, the Big Family Cooking Showdown, which is coming back, but with completely new on-screen talent. What's the thinking behind that?
So Big Family Cooking Showdown, I thought had an extraordinary set of values. It felt so celebratory. It was so great that it took us into different families, different communities. It celebrated the role of food in family life. I don't think that it is an out-and-out sort of, shows like MasterChef Professionals are about exquisite cooking and about high-end cooking. This is not about high-end cooking. It's about food as the glue that holds a family together. And I think it's a series that has, needs to find, it can grow and develop and find itself. And I think that it's really important when you see equality in the show that you give it a try. With £1 Million Menu, it's the same. We want to give that another go because I think there's some extraordinary qualities in that, and it identifies a particular phenomenon that's happening. There are people who are setting up, wanting the range of people, younger people, older people, wanting to set up their own businesses, thinking about food as a way of sort of like basing that business on. That there's loads of people in that situation. There's also loads and loads of investors that are hungrily going around trying to invest into these companies. So we bring those together. And I think that is a series that, we need to have faith in the ideas that we believe in. So we're going to bring it back, and I think it will really grow.
And when you wade into kind of really serious issues, which was done amazingly last night, I've got to say, in Horizon in support of male suicide, stopping male suicide, which was just an incredible programme. And the timing-wise of it as well it's a long time coming, really. But when you wade into serious issues, how do you approach that, and how do you know how much of those types of things to commission and when they need to transmit and things like that?
I think that BBC2 needs to be the home of those debates. It needs to be the place where we really engage with all of the biggest, most challenging issues, and to do it in a way that is across the schedule, but at the same time it can be quite weighty fare, and so you have to balance the schedule with some offerings that are lighter, that are more more entertaining, and then we're giving us also that ability. We're not driven by overnights, we're not driven by share. When I commissioned Abortion, we didn't commission it thinking, wow, I bet that's going to get a huge overnight audience. But was it an important time to be talking about abortion in the role of in women's lives over the last 50 years? Absolutely. So and similarly with a series that is starting soon on BBC2, which is called We Are British Jews, which was commissioned over a year ago, which follows a group of 8 Jewish people, from Britain, from lots of different walks of life, some believers, some non-believers, but they explore issues that are really, really, pertinent to them, pertinent to us all now, which are, they explore anti-Semitism and the rise of anti-Semitism in the UK. They also then travel to Israel. They explore what Israel and its relationship with Palestine. They visit settlers. They visit communities in the occupied territories. The clip that we're going to show now is a clip. There's so many encounters across the series that really do challenge each of the individuals and challenge all of us as an audience. So I think it's a very important series for the Jewish community, but I think it's also a hugely important series for the audience as a whole. And the clip that we're going to show now is that the contributors are in Hebron. They are visiting a Palestinian who has been a campaigner, for Palestinian rights. He describes how he sees that there are two, he's been arrested by the Palestinian authorities, he's been arrested by the Israeli authorities, and he sees that there's one rule for the Palestinians and one rule for the Israelis, which he describes as apartheid, and or a form of apartheid. And this is a clip that from that encounter.
What was the commissioning journey for that?
The commissioning journey was that the production company Lion pitched it to Fatima Solaria, and then Fatima brought it to, with Tom McDonald, her boss, brought it to the channel. And we felt that it was such an interesting way, that journey to Israel and the occupied territories was such an interesting way of exploring these issues. And so, I mean, this is one of the things where you just realise that the level of complexity of that debate, the level of complexity of making that programme, the level of the sort of editorial excellence in terms of the judgments that are made within making that programme, I think sort of like show the care and the attention to detail that is all about what we do on BBC2 as well. And I think it's a really powerful and important series.
What would you say are the biggest challenges that your channel faces, or you face as controller of the channel?
I think that the key challenge, I'm going to sound like the key challenge is a great opportunity. No, the key challenge is that we want to commission these weighty pieces. We want to commission these single pieces. We want to commission great single films like Being Blacker, Bolly Dineen's Being Blacker. We want to be able to commission films like Chris Packham film about Asperger's. We commission more titles, more individual pieces than any other channel per year. And so our challenge is that we don't have these great monoliths across the schedule that mean that you've got that consistency for the viewer. So our schedule all schedules are dynamic. Our schedule is extraordinarily dynamic. It's a great opportunity for you guys as producers, because it means that we're a multi-genre channel. We're a mainstream channel, but we're completely committed to arts, religion, to science, to history. And so it means that our challenge is then to weave that into a tapestry that's going to bring the audience to that. And it means that some pieces, I'm sure that this is not going to be judged on share. It's going to be judged on the audience response to it.
And with that audience, the average audience age is 62 for BBC2. Is that a challenge in terms of trying to bring that down and trying to appeal to a younger audience?
I think that what the work we've been doing on BBC2 is to make the channel more alive, more vibrant, more challenging, more engaged with this complexity, more unorthodox. And I think that means that we are more relevant to the whole of the British, the audience. We're not just chasing young viewers. We're not our remit. BBC3, BBC1 have got a very, very committed focus to looking at younger audiences. Our channel's mission is to make for the audience to feel, to see, that you can see in the original tape, that all of those shared qualities that our content has on BBC2. And so that can appeal to young, and it will appeal to young. If you look at Louis Theroux, if you look at Ramesh Ranganathan's Misadventures, if you look at Ed Ball's recent Adventures in Trumpland, all of those pieces appeal to a really broad audience, but they're also really loved by younger audiences.
I'm going to quote you now, if that's all right. You said, "Nurturing, taking risks and allowing ideas to grow is how brilliant programmes develop," and you discount the impact of that at your peril. And that's in a recent interview where you were criticising Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, Google, and that sort of idea.
I don't think I was criticising them. I think what I was saying was that the role of the BBC, and I was talking about BBC2 in particular, in terms of nurturing growing ideas, is absolutely key to the ecology of the UK, in terms of our creative ecology. And so I think that you discount, you pull away from that at your peril. That's the PSBs have such a vital role to play in all of these great ideas. This ecology, I think, has been an extraordinary happening over the last 15, 20 years, and so I just want that to continue because it's such an important. It creates ideas like we've seen today.
Talking about attracting younger viewers, but younger participants. You've got this new series coming up called The Wonderful World of Babies.
I don't know if they signed their consent.
They've got the most brilliant headgear on anyway. Yeah. But what are you hoping that's going to do for the channel?
So in terms of the sort of science, that surgeons is obviously at the gorier end of the science story. Wonderful World of Babies is a science show. It's a major science experiment that there's 200 babies experimented on. 200 babies came to the baby lab, so it's a major...
That just sounds wrong, by the way, the baby lab.
It's called...
yeah.
But it's the space where the experiments take place. And what it is it's a way of looking at child development and seeing the thing. I mean, we're all babies once, and so you don't have to be a parent to see the amazing sort of fascination in this. And what was also brilliant about this commission from Voltage is that they went out and found a brilliant new paediatrician. Well, I mean, she's been a paediatrician for a while, but she's new to television, called Goody Singh, and she, I think she's terrific. So what the experiment that you're about to see is about about self-control and about there's a greater understanding now that the role that self-control plays in all of our developments is absolutely key to our success or failures later on in life. And that they can actually isolate the moment that a child learns self-control. And this clip shows that.
I love how all that self-control gave him hiccups.
I know the feeling.
You don't think of BBC2 as having kind of out-and-out entertainment? Would you agree?
I think that our entertainment is a word we often use at the BBC, but also at the BBC in particular, BBC2 in particular, is purpose. And the purpose has got to be at the heart of so much of what we do. So with Top Gear, with Dragon's Den, they're both extraordinary entertainment shows, but they've got a a purpose at the heart of them. One of them's about business, one of them's about cars. There's a specialist factual sort of underpinning to them. And then if we're in the world of pure ents, then it's comedy. So it's normally comedy ents, but we don't do shiny floors. We don't do Strictly.
What's the purpose of I'll Get This?
So I'll Get This came from a conversation about, we were talking about panel shows, and we were talking about, there was a conversation last year about, we don't want any more panel shows, and it wasn't that we didn't want any more panel shows, but what we did want was to be challenged with new ideas. We wanted to be challenged with new ways of having that chat, of having that interaction, having that ability to access impromptu, conversations. I'll Get This is a new format. The idea is that a group of random celebrities turn up at a restaurant. They have to bring their credit cards, and they sit around the table, and there's a series of rounds whilst they're ordering different meals ordering their meal, and then the people who win the rounds get to take their credit card out of the bowl in the middle, which means that they can eat and drink what they like with hilarious consequences.
And we've got a clip right now.
So it's different for us, but I still think that it's got real mischief about it, and it's got just the gameplay about it. And at 10 o'clock, it's a different way of doing factual entertainment. It's a different way of doing, the sort of game show.
I'm glad you went with cards and not keys as well. That would have been a completely different programme. Let's talk drama. Before we get into drama, there was an announcement yesterday about Peaky Blinders.
Yeah.
If I was you, I would be utterly fucked off. Because that show, I mean, it's amazing. I love it. You supported that show, you nurtured it, and its home is BBC2. How do you feel? It's now going to BBC1.
Good question. As Charlotte said,
you can say fucked off, it's fine.
It's like a child leaving home. No, it's if you look at the drama slate on 2 now, that we've got Michaela Cole's new drama, we've got Adam Kay's This Is Gonna Hurt, which is this, his extraordinary memoir about life as a junior doctor. that is going to be both funny and really revealing about life inside the NHS. If you think about Trigonometry, Duncan Macmillan, Nephew Woods, threesome comedy drama about what happens when someone else comes into your marriage, and you both start having a relationship with them. So there are amazing new the slate of drama that we're commissioning on too, that talking to peers about how we evolve drama on 2 and what the specific role of 2 is in the drama landscape in the UK, but in the BBC in particular, has been a brilliant sort of series of conversations we've had over the last 2 years. And I think that, with Black Earth Rising coming this year, Mother, Father, Son, that I'm just about to show you a clip of, and single dramas like Fergus O'Brien's Mother's Day about the Warrington bomb, which is so moving, which is on very, very soon. So we have got an amazing slate of dramas, and I will get round at the end of this very long sentence to answer your question, which is that, obviously it's an amazing piece. It's done so well on BBC2. It's been so, we did really, it's such an important show that for last year that the marketing, the way that the social team, promoted it, I just think really helped make it the great, success that it was. But when shows pop like that, when shows, we're a mainstream multi-genre channel, BBC2, but if a show suddenly becomes just, is just an out-and-out success, then it does need to move to BBC One.
Why?
Because it could then create, because my role is to innovate, my role is to take risks. I don't want lots and lots of shows that just stay in the schedule. Obviously I want some shows that stay in the schedule, but I don't want, but when a show moves to BBC One like that, I mean, as I say, I would not have been able to commission those other shows. And if I think about what I'm most excited about, in scripted, you just think, wow, all of those new shows. And so, Line of Duty moved last year, and it was absolutely the right thing for the show, absolutely. And so we would not have commissioned Mother, Father, Son unless Line of Duty had moved.
And Collateral was really interesting because you look at that before you see which channel it's attached to, and I would have thought it would have been a BBC One because of the names in it, first and foremost. But it was 2, and it was a huge success for you and a fantastic drama. But
I don't think it is about, I think that talent wants to work on the BBC, talent wants to work on BBC2, and so with that series, David Hare's, first multi-episode series on British television, and the level of complexity, the way in which it was illuminating stories about migration and the people trafficking, I thought that there were so many layers to that story. Yes, it was a genre piece. Yes, it was a thriller, but it had that complexity to the storytelling that made it 2 for me.
It's brilliant. How have you managed to convince Richard Gere to appear in TV since Kojak in 1976?
Well, it goes back to your last question.
He's not in Peaky Blinders, by the way, just to point out. Well, that would be amazing.
So Richard Gere is in Mother, Father, Son, which is written by Tom Rob Smith, who has got a brilliant relationship with BBC2 in particular. He recently wrote for Saatchi for FX that we played on 2, which was an astonishing piece of writing. And so this is a 8-part series. It's about a family which is the patriarch is this mogul called Max, who is played by Richard. He is divorced from his Caden, his sons, so he's the father, Caden's the son. He's divorced estranged from Helen McCrory, who is his wife, his ex-wife, and but Caden is running the big London newspaper, but Caden's life is going off the rails, and Max has turned up in the UK to try and find out what's going on. He's scary, isn't he?
Yeah, so good.
So I mean, with Tom wrote London Spy. That his star is just completely on the ascendant, and he's one of the most in-demand writers in world drama, I'd say. But this is something that he wants to do for BBC2. He's then able to attract that talent. So it's an extraordinary, coming together and also the quality of the writing, the challenging nature of the writing means is when you watch it, when you see the end of episode 1, you'll realise why it's on BBC2. I mean, it's really, really challenging.
And there's quite a lot of people out there who are interested, they want to know what you're looking for. They want to know what you're commissioning, what's next. So what are you looking for?
I think because we're, as I say, multi-genre, because all of the genres matter onto that, it's so key for you to be watching what we're doing with documentary, watching what we're doing with specialist factual. So I think at 8 o'clock, there's always that need, there's always that desire for how can you get that, explore the way the world works, how the world works. Inside the Factory has got such an amazing tone and such an amazing sort of open door to say, come on, let's go in and sort of find out how the world works, but to do it in a way which doesn't talk down to the audience, but neither does it feel like a lecture, to feel like a sort of like homework. So I would love more ideas pitched through factual, which have got that, it's so difficult to get that lightness of touch about subject matter that has also then got that complexity, that detail that the audience then really want to try and find out, what happens next. And then there's a new series that we've commissioned from Ramesh, which is a different type of entertainment show. So it's, comedy entertainment is always played at 10 o'clock and is in that half hour. The scripted comedy, which we haven't spoken about, has just been doing been such a rich vein of form with Mum and with Motherland and with Inside Number 9 live. There's a live episode later this autumn, Halloween special. Wow. But in terms of that comedy entertainment, I think it's a really interesting time to think, how can we, with Ramesh, the Ranganation, that the idea is that it is going to be a 45-minute show. It'll play in a different part of the schedule. So it's sort of comedy-ents could grow in a different place and have less of that sort of gag, and could be more, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes before we commission other pieces in that area. But I think that there's huge opportunity across factual in particular. We're mainly factual on the channel.
Are there any ideas you get pitched all the time that you never want to hear again?
I think it's about the approach. I think it's about what you want is that sense of producers coming to you with the start of a conversation, and that idea that I thought that some of the commissioning survey stuff there, obviously we need to up our game and get back to people and be quicker, but there is a sort of binary yes/no about things, like, do you want this idea? No, I'll take it. And it's like that. Well, when I was in the independent sector, it never worked like that. You have a conversation, and you have that conversation, you start that dialogue, you build an idea, and obviously it's the indie's idea, it's the supplier's idea, but it's the way in which television is such a collaborative process. And if you think about it, it's just mine, and then every now and then you might just sort of try and sell it somewhere. I just don't think that's the way forward. And I think that the team in factual, and in entertainment and in comedy and drama are they're such great teams in terms of their dialogues that they're able to develop with producers.
Let's get a couple of questions from the audience. This is really good. Channel 5 have recently parked its tanks on your lawn, commissioning shows that are stealing your audience. How will you counter their strategy?
I think that we have to evolve our schedule. We can't just keep making the same shows. As I've been saying, that we're all about making the channel feel more alive, more vital, more engaged with what's happening in British society. So I don't see it as Ben parking his tanks on anyone's lawn.
Patrick, you've said that one of the things you're most proud of from BBC2 is the expansion of your social history programmes to look at the history of diverse regions such as Liverpool, Bristol. What are your plans to move this forward and push more boundaries in the coming year?
So, commissioning documentary from around the UK is so important for us, and so Redcar is landing quite soon, the mighty Redcar, which is a brand new docu-soap, but a docu-soap with real integrity and with real extraordinary storytelling, and the characters within it that you really you just care about every step of the journey that they take over this period of time, during this crucial year in their lives. I think it's got a completely different tone to it. The quality of the filmmaking is so exceptional. So that story from Redcar is really important. The House Through Time, the next series of House Through Time, is coming from Newcastle. David Olusoga is going to Newcastle and the houses that we're exploring there. The next series of Hospital is coming from Liverpool. So it's so important that the channel, I said earlier in the year, we want to wrest the channel away from the southeast and make it speak to the whole of the UK and reflect stories from across the UK. Valley Girls, which, it's called Factory Girls now. It's called Back in Time for the Factory now. Starts very soon, which is about women in women going back to work in a factory in South Wales, but seeing the way in which the lives of women changed during the sort of 50s and 60s.
Brilliant. Please welcome to the stage contestant number 2, Cassian Harrison.
Afternoon all.
We'll do a little bit with both of you about kind of both channels, and I guess it'd be really interesting to find out what you see as the difference between your two channels. Who wants to pick up that?
He's got lots more money.
So we're a mainstream channel.
Yeah.
BBC2 is a mainstream channel.
Yeah.
BBC4 is a specialist channel. And there are ways in which we work very, very closely together. I mean, we sit very close together. We talk to each other each week. We share the wonderful Ali as our head of scheduling. So she's across what's happening on both channels, and we understand I know what Cassian's doing, and he knows what I'm doing. And we talk about seasons, don't we? We talk about what are the... and it might be interesting in terms of the seasons to talk about. That's where you can see the sort of difference between what we do, with British Asian season. We commissioned big, broad social history in Passage to Britain, telling the stories of the different the boats that came to the UK from South Asia, whereas...
On BBC4 we commission a wonderful series which is a series of what do Asian artists do all day. I mean, we're an arts and culture channel. An awful lot of what we do is absolutely very granular and detailed on that front. We've got a wonderful film this Friday actually on Bhangra in Britain, again a kind of really detailed piece of social history about a hidden world. So there is a real balance of tonality where I think the two channels actually, and I was joking at the beginning, because there's a real distinctive sense of between the both of us about what it is that we're doing and what it is that we're there for. And Patrick is there to bring a mainstream audience to the BBC, and my job is to provide something that's really distinctive in the broadcasting landscape, something that nobody else does. And so from my point of view, I'm always looking for that which is actually really different from anything else that's actually being made. And I think we do it really well, we can find a way to make that work, and we can make that work at times with BBC One as well, across all of the portfolio. We can find a way for all of our channels and services to sing with their individual voices and to fit together. I think that's something really brilliant. It's something that only the BBC can do.
You mentioned kind of briefly there about the research that was done in response and things like that. When it comes to commissions, and it's not in-house anymore, it's BBC Studios and indies, how does that work? Is there a conversation that comes about the old idea of a quota for each? How is it working? Do you look at that? Is it part of a conversation? Is it something that you discuss?
We have our own relationships with suppliers, and we're always talking about that and suppliers, and there are many people in this room who know us and our sensibilities and the distinctiveness of those really well. So we're always having and the genres are also having conversations with those suppliers who, and they again, our commissioners know very well what it is that Patrick and I are looking for each of the channels. But that also doesn't mean that there aren't times when we talk with each other, or commissioners will come and talk to both of us about, is this something that might work for you, or it might work for BBC4? So, it's a really open conversation where all of us are committed to getting the best ideas on air.
Yeah.
But with studios, I mean, the in-house guarantee's gone. So, in terms of they're operating very much, there's obviously contestability happening with different titles, but in terms of, and we've got good relationships with the execs in studios as much as we have in the indie sector. So it's actually, it's a very, very level playing field.
Last night, Michaela Cole gave the most extraordinary and brilliant and honest speech, and she spoke so movingly about the industry's need to embrace misfits. And I wanted to ask you both how you react to that, and is that something, you talk about taking risks and things like that, but when it comes to, that kind of comment, how you react to that?
I thought it was so powerful when she was, the whole speech was extraordinarily powerful, but as she spoke about the house and described about what it feels like being inside the house and whether you're inside the house or outside the house. I thought that was so powerful, and that will stay with me. I think that she spoke. It's so important that when we think about representation, that it isn't box ticking, that these are people, they're people's lives, that there are whole sections of the community that we're reflecting, responding to. If you look at the British Asian season at the moment, that the number of people who are watching BBC2 from an Asian background is extraordinary. I mean, the numbers are through the roof. And that's because people are seeing their stories on television. And so how we engage with and tell those stories, but also the way in which we just change the whole the makeup of the channel. If you think about BBC2 now, where you have David Olusoga and Nadia Hussain and Anita Rani and Goody Singh and Yasmin Khan, that all of these great talents who are now the faces of BBC2, that I see that as that's a step forward. But we need to still that's not over, that journey.
And I think for BBC4, I think absolutely at the core of the remit, and what I work incredibly hard to, is actually to make the channel into a doorway to the BBC and the wider BBC for people who have never been on television before and or have never made programmes before. We have an ongoing programme with the BFI of projects where we just basically put a national call out to young filmmakers who've never made anything, and we select and judge what they submit. And I've done a night based around Humphrey Jennings' amazing Listen to Britain film. We did that last year, which was just documentaries about Britain in the 21st century. We've got an amazing season coming up this autumn around animation, where we've done a call out to all of Britain's animators who've never had anything on television. We're going to have an extraordinary night of new animation. And there's a clip that I'll show later where, another thing that I work very hard with Jonty and the arts team on is a project that we have, which we give the putative title of Artists First, as it were, which is to go to people who want to make video rather than specifically television programs. We want to make things that will work on television that don't really stand as traditional television programs, that are absolutely pieces of misfit content, and put those on air. And as I say, we've got something later which is a little bit mind-blowing, but anyway, but it's terrific for that. And Patrick and I were talking about Michaela's speech earlier today, and we completely agree that we've got to welcome misfits, and that we also have to allow them to continue to be misfits.
Yeah.
I think
support them through that journey as well.
Yeah.
And just this afternoon, Jeremy Corbyn, in his speech, the suggestion that social class of the BBC should be published. What's your response to that?
I mean, I think that we're being increasingly transparent about the makeup of the who's making the programmes. Working out who is making the programmes, who's in front of the programmes, is really key. And I think that diversity in terms of class, diversity in terms of region, in terms of representation, is as important. Is all part of the same story about making the BBC, making British television reflect modern Britain.
Patrick,
you want me to go?
Your work is done. Thank you, sir. Patrick Holland, everyone. We'll move up, Cassian, that would be great, thank you. Before we crack on with Cassian, let's just take a look at BBC4. Cassian, what does BBC4 mean to you?
Well, I think it's an amazing institution of British television. I'm incredibly proud to have an element of custodianship of it at the moment, but that also extends to an extraordinary team. Patrick mentioned our scheduling team, which you share with BBC2, Ali, all the amazing suppliers, the amazing commissioners who support it, because really, as I say, it's something utterly distinct in the broadcasting landscape. It's something that only the BBC could do. It offers programming that only a public service broadcaster with the scale and the depth and the passion and the commitment that the BBC has could offer. And I think that, as I say, I think it's an honour and a privilege to do something, look after something so unique.
for you over the past 12 months? What have been some of the highlights?
I think the channel's been having an extraordinary year, actually. I mean, we've had the highest share ever at the beginning of this year. I was told just at the beginning of this week that we've had the highest number of titles rating over 1 million ever in the channel's history as well. So I think the main thing that I'm really proud of, and on behalf of everybody who contributes to the channel, is that audiences continue to love us, continue to find us, and in fact are only growing in scale. So I think that's one thing that I'm really proud of. I think we've had some really brilliant kind of, boundary pushing programming. I mean, I worked with Tom MacDonald and the Specialist Factual Commissioning team. We had an idea of a different way of doing history programming, which much more followed the mode of podcasts, of serial, etc., which we called box set history, which again is a kind of word that ended up on the front page of broadcast, more messy programming that wasn't absolutely crafted. We did 2 series at the beginning of the year, one with Wall to Wall on Ruth Ellis and one on Lady Jane Grey with Darlow Smithson, both of which rated through the roof and did incredibly well. So we're returning to that. I'm incredibly proud of, we were talking earlier about BBC4's commitment to specialism. We've just done a series which I've been passionately wanting to do for years, and actually it's about managing to find a way to navigate it with the rights to do a proper series on cinema. We've just had a 5-part Mark Commode series on the secrets of cinema, all the different genres, that with a lot of help from the legal fair dealing side of the BBC, we were able to do, I think for the first time, a really definitive series across all of the genres of cinema that had clips from all of the best movies. A brilliant overarching thesis, did incredibly well with audiences as well.
Was that a risk take for you?
What, to do Secrets of Cinema?
Yeah.
It was a challenge to get it to work. I mean, there are many different, and I've been on this stage before talking about pushing boundaries of form, and there are many ways in which you can do that. And the question about that one was that basically nobody believed you could do a series about cinema where you could get enough clips from the films to build the argument. So that was a risk, but it was forgive me, not a legal risk, but it was a question around business affairs and what we could do. Other pieces, I mean, we're doing other, and I'll probably come to this in a moment, but in terms of things that are even riskier at the moment, I mean, we continue to look at what I think are really quite hair-whitening kind of ways to push the boundaries of what television is. And I've been working on a project for about a year now where, there's been an awful lot of debate about artificial intelligence, etc., and what that might mean for the creative industries, etc., etc. And I began to think, we've got a really strong tradition on BBC4 of actually doing things, of doing experiments rather than just making programmes about it. And again, the BBC has this amazing research and development department, which is, all of these people parked in a corner who originally are the people that invented colour television and other kind of, groundbreaking technologies. And I'd been having various conversations with them, and we came to this kind of conversation where we realised that actually what they were looking at and what BBC4 does had this strange convergence. We're a channel that makes original programmes, but also wants to work with the BBC's archive and our back catalogue as well to find ways to curate that and give that more purpose and more meaning for audiences now. And so what they've done for us is build a kind of BBC4 AI, which kind of endeavours to understand what the BBC4-ness of programmes. And we've decided to unleash that on the BBC archive. So as a support to the scheduling team, I mean, it is quite a wild experiment, but what it's been doing is endeavouring to find television and suggesting it to the scheduling team. And it's been rooting out rather wonderful pieces of television that we don't really, or we wouldn't ordinarily encounter, including A History of Ping Pong is the latest one that we might put into the schedules. And so what we decided to do at the beginning of September is we're going to kind of give that AI the channel for a night to see what it comes up with. It's still slightly in progress. It's not absolutely going to happen live, but I might just show you the trailer that we've now got on air.
Let's have a look.
Be relaxed.
I was going to say, is that what you keep telling yourself? Relax, it's
Exactly.
going to be fine.
Fingers crossed.
Where do you, because is it a bit like, if you kind of put Spotify on shuffle of your library, is it a bit like a visual of that with BBC4's archive or the BBC's archive?
There are different bits of it. There are bits where what it's done is suggested programmes. It's had a list which Ali and John, who are the brilliant scheduling team, have looked at. And so it's about AI working with us and our expertise. And then there's another bit which is really about how the hell can a computer even begin to think about what television is and understand it, where we've let it look at, 250,000 hours of programmes and try and understand it through two methods principally. One, by trying to work out by object recognition what's in the frames, and the other one by reading the subtitles and natural language recognition, trying to work out what the programme's about. I will say that the output of it is not what you would call television. It might end up being slightly more like video art, but what we're doing, which I think is really important, is being absolutely explicit about our working. So when you watch it, you'll see what the AI is trying to do and how it misrecognises things. So it actually becomes an incredibly kind of, revelatory journey into this thing which everybody talks about, but nobody really knows how it works. But in the course of this, you will actually get a sense of how AI actually thinks.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. But, this is the point of BBC4. This is what we're there for. We're there to push at the boundaries, to introduce new challenges, new forms, do something which is, as I say, distinctive.
How will you know if that's worked?
What? I think, put it this way, again, there are things that we do that we have more high rating programmes than ever before. I'm not expecting this one to be high rating. What I'm expecting this to do is to, as I say, I think it will foster debate. I think there will be a lot of discussion about it. And I think that's an absolutely valid reason for doing something on BBC4. I think it's really important.
When you have brilliant successes on the channel like Detectorists, award-winning, all that kind of thing, when you see the success of something like that, do you look to replicate that, to find the replacement for that, or do you almost kind of take a left turn and not go down that road?
I think it's in exactly the same mode as Patrick spoke about, which is that one's on a channel when you're looking at maintaining a service, it's about walking a tightrope between continuing with the things that audiences love about what it is that you do, alongside refreshing and renewing what you do, because inevitably if you just keep doing those things, then it will start to become stale and dull. Detectorists was an amazing phenomenon as a series, and again, amazing kudos and credit to Shane and to Mackenzie and to everybody involved, and and it was, in a funny way, it kind of became the kind of apotheosis of the BBC4 sitcom, because I talked about BBC4 being a channel of specialists. This was a kind of beautifully observed sitcom about the geekiest people you could possibly imagine. But it's also driven by the passion of the people making it, and it's Mackenzie's baby. And Mackenzie has done it. He's done the series that he has, and I think he wants to move on. But that doesn't mean that Shane and I and the comedy team aren't also looking for the next really distinctive BBC4 comedies, entertainment pieces. And again, we've got a brilliant new series coming up for the autumn, which I'll show a clip on in a minute, called There She Goes, which is written by Sean Pye, Sharon Horgan's company, starring David Tennant. Very different from the Detectorists, but it has that same thing of an incredibly intimate look at a world. It's a sitcom based around the experiences of family with a highly disabled child, and the poetry and the warmth and the humour and the sadness of that experience and the joy of that experience are all mixed together they've shot one episode as a pilot, and it brought me to tears. Actually, it made me laugh hilariously, but it also brought me to tears too. And actually, if we just play a clip, you'll get a brief glimpse of its flavour and what it feels like. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And I just think the performances in it, I mean, it's David Tennant who's a star, obviously, but everybody else in it as well is phenomenal. I mean, it's just a brilliant ensemble piece and beautifully filmed.
Scripted's expensive.
Yes.
Comedy or drama. When you're looking at how the budget is split, so how do you work out how much of each you want?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of resources. It's true. So comedy, we have the capacity to do 2 or 3 really special pieces a year. But as I say, Shane and his team have a brilliant sense of what makes a BBC4 comedy piece work, and we've had phenomenal successes there. We've also got, I was just watching on the train up here, we have the return of Vic and Bob to BBC4 with Vic and Bob's Big Night Out amazing. Coming this autumn, which is hilarious as well. And my one note was kind of that as they did it, they shot a pilot, which was shown on BBC2 as well, and was that as they brought it, could they just bring a piquancy of BBC4 to it? And by God, have they gone for it? They have ripped the piss out of the channel, totally. But it is brilliant. It's really nice. Really well done. And then in terms of scripted, no, we don't have the capacity to do drama as we used to do on BBC4 before. I mean, the channel did have that fabulous tradition of single dramas, but the truth of it is drama costs have only inflated, and and it had to be the right decision that in the end we needed to consolidate our drama money, or our full drama money, on BBC 1 and 2. But that doesn't mean, again, in terms of pushing the boundaries and and experimenting, that we can't find ways to do scripted. And another thing I'm really proud of that we've done this year, and we did a season of it last year as well, but we did a series of short monologues called Snatches, curated by Vicky Featherstone at the Royal Court, which was 8 monologues to go with the Hear Her season around women getting the vote. 8 monologues, 8 different writers. Abby Morgan, great writers amongst them, but also writers who had never been on television before. And they were just fantastic singular pieces in the, kind of Alan Bennett's Talking Heads rebooted and reinvented for the 21st century. And I'm tremendously proud of those. And there are ways to do scripted and look at doing scripted on BBC4 if one's experimental and bold about what you're doing.
And through acquisitions as well.
And of course, the other thing not to forget is that the other thing which is tremendously important to our narrative is the Saturday night and our foreign language drama. And actually, it's not just on Saturday night. The Saturday night ones are doing phenomenally well. We're just announcing a new one today called The Plague, which takes us into the 16th century Spain. So it's kind of, we're going a bit Name of the Rose. But we've also, with Sue, who runs that acquisitions team, I'm really keen to look at other shapes and other forms of drama that we can acquire. So we had a brilliant run of an utterly bizarre French science fiction series called Missions over the spring, which we actually ran midweek, which did tremendously well with audiences. A completely different tonality and a completely different approach to the drama that we show.
And you've got Make Me Up. This is equally as interesting as AI in terms of it's quite an explanation required.
This is our last clip to show. It's a very brief snippet, but this is, so as I said, I have sat on these stages before, and I think a couple of years ago, and I said we should bleep with form. This is an amazing video artist called Rachel McLean, working with us and with Creative Scotland to put money into this, has come up with this extraordinary and bizarre and kind of eye-bleeding journey into a kind of dystopian future world, which is like The Handmaid's Tale wrought in kind of eye-bleeding Technicolor neon. I'm not going to tell you much more than that, but should we just play the clip that we have? There you go, a little taste of something coming this autumn, which is, as I say, extraordinary. It's not like television that you have ever seen before, but it's wonderful.
Are partnership something do you want to explore more of?
I think partnership is always fantastically important. I think, it helps us to bolster out the spend that we have, but also I really like that position of BBC4 being an enabler, being a platform where new talent, people who've never been able to be on television before, to come through the gates of the BBC and to be able to have a platform for their voice. And I'm really happy to work with other organisations, other people in order to achieve that. Yeah. That's what we're there to do. We're there to be a gateway out into the broader world of creativity, of those misfits that Michaela was talking about, and let them take their first steps on the BBC. It's what we're there to do.
You say the spend that you have when you are faced with budget cuts, how are you addressing how you make those savings?
Well, at the moment, I think there was a broadcast piece about, the BBC4 budget going down, etc. And it's worth bearing in mind that those numbers are quite variable because they absorb things like sport, which goes up and down according to what years we're in. So actually, the channel has had big cuts over the course of the last 7-8 years, but actually we're in a position now where, it's pretty stable what our baseline is. I can't pretend I wouldn't like, Charlotte and I talk about it a little bit more, to do special things here and there. But, we have funding to do, what I think is brilliant original television, to sustain a really engaging schedule out of that, and to engage with and support and nurture new talent in that space too. And as I say, there's amazing things that I remain tremendously proud of that we've done in the last year.
Who would you say are your competitors? Who do you see as your competitors?
I like to take BBC4 in places its job to be is not really to be in competition. I mean, you know, I could, as it were, end up rubbing up against Sky Arts, and there are things that we do that are similar to Sky Arts. There are things, you know, I could end up, you know, rubbing up against Patrick, but my job is to be distinctive, is to find a path. Is that going to be the broadcast headline?
I mean, it's veering into #MeToo, isn't it, really? It's like, come on.
It's all right. We'll talk about it after. No, but the job is to forge a place which is distinctive and which other people are not occupying, and that is a brilliant brief to work to.
Talking about brief, what are you looking for?
I think again, it's been said, and I said it before, that what I'm wary of with BBC4 is that it can have a chance, and I think this is true of the BBC as well, and Patrick's been doing brilliant work on BBC2 to counter this, is that there's a mode of programming which involves a presenter, usually white, middle-aged and male, standing on a hill and telling you it like it is. And I think in all our ways, we all recognise that, you know, the era of that is past. It never really should have been a particularly dominant thing. So we're all looking for different ways to shift a form. You know, it is a factual channel at its heart, but the different ways that we can bring that specialism, that information, that insight to audiences without it coming in a kind of rather static narrative, I think is critical. And as I say, the box set history mode that we broached at the beginning of the year, which is much more impromptu, much more present tense, where the filmmaker is taking centre stage of the narrative. I really like that. The thought that we can make programmes that feel like they don't quite know where they're going to end, I think is really exciting. It's the truth with those box set histories, it's the truth with the AI piece. I think we can allow ourselves to be surprised a bit more often, and I'd like to, again, open BBC4 up to more opportunities for us all, for programme makers as much as myself, to find themselves surprised by what they do.
Okay, got some questions that have come in from people. This one says, should BBC4 be addressing more topical issues? Is there room for a landmark on science and society?
I think we always do endeavour to look at topicality or social history and how it rubs up against topicality. Again, another piece that I'm announcing today is following up from the Ruth Ellis piece, is we're doing extraordinary analysis of the story of the Yorkshire Ripper. And its social history, and how, and what I think is really interesting is we're very much looking at it from a female, if not even feminist perspective, which is, how is it that the Yorkshire Ripper could have done everything, got away with what he did? And actually, when you unpack that, it gives extraordinary insights into the shape of British society in the late 70s, which I think have real resonances today. We're also announcing another thing today, which is a really in-depth analysis of the history of eugenics, of basically science's support for racism, which is much of a blush to us as a country. The United Kingdom, England in particular, was responsible for the invention of the science of eugenics. And in a world of kind of the rise of the far right, etc., I personally think this is a really important piece of, you know, scientific, intellectual investigation for us to engage in. And then last of all, we can't forget Storyville, which is, you know, the international documentary brand of choice, has its home on BBC4, and again, that gives extraordinary contemporary views of the world landscape. So yeah, always interested.
So we have BBC4's Slow TV.
Yes.
How about Slow News? A 6-monthly roundup of all the stories and themes that have big implications, not a constant, unprocessed stream of notifications on anything and everything.
Is that called Twitter?
And one more, it says, Cassian, more clever quiz? We hope so.
More clever quiz? Ooh, which clever quiz?
More.
Huh? Any. Oh, clever quiz. I'd love to do more clever quizzes, absolutely. I mean, Only Connect is a brilliant phenomenon. We are looking, actually, I am looking at a kind of, I am looking at what we might do around music in that area, so watch this space.
Interesting. Patrick, Cassian, thank you very much indeed for your time, and thank you for your time as well this afternoon.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.